All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here on President's Day to hear from our esteemed speaker. Today we have Dr. Eric Devendorf from the Air Force Research Laboratory that's going to say why bits take bytes out of your mission. Have to be careful how you say that. Um, and he is the Cyber Core Technical Competency Lead at the Air Force Research Laboratory on the Rome Research Site in Rome, New York. He's responsible for managing a $400 million cyber research and development portfolio to develop information warfare capabilities for maintaining freedom of action in cyber while denying the adversary the same. Began his Air Force career in 2013 as a cybersecurity researcher. And in addition to running three research programs, he's also allowed him to attend squadron officer school. And then he served as a director of advanced courses in engineering, where he established cyber education and training partnerships for foreign nations. He has his master's, and PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Buffalo. And then he completed his squadron officer school and his Air Command and Staff College in 2022. So I will turn it over to Eric.
All right. Thank you for that generous introduction. You spoiled a bit of my opening, which is like, who am I? I'm a mechanical engineer. I did my BS, MS, and PhD all in mechanical engineering with an emphasis on optimization, decision-making, and design. I then interviewed for a job with the Air Force, whereupon they said, here, you can be a computer engineer for us. Only though, we can only hire you because you did a math minor as an undergrad, because otherwise we couldn't hire you into this position. And I said, sure. And so I got the title. So first, if you're in a computer engineering degree problem, it's become obvious to me that to get that designated, you just have to go work for the Air Force. You don't need to worry about anything else. But also that you never know where the little bits and pieces of your education or experience are going to matter. One of those questions that I've heard numerous times, whether it be from students. I taught while I was at the University of Buffalo, a couple of classes, rather large, 180, 200 students for some of them, as well as at the advanced course in engineering, is when will I ever need this? When will I have to use this? And the answer is that you have no idea when it's going to be useful, but it might be. And so while you're at school now, take advantage of every chance you have to engage, learn something, join a club, build something. One of the best experiences I had was I built a human-powered vehicle, i.e. a bike, and I raced it. And I learned a lot about why when you build something in upstate New York, which has cold winters, and then you race it in Florida, there's a real big difference between the conditions there, especially when you encase yourself in carbon fiber for optimal airflow and it's 100 degrees out. So just as from an opening standpoint, you never know where life's going to take you. And so for me, just a little who am I, we hit a lot of these already. I was the ACE director 2018 to 2022. ACE is a program to build cyber warriors and leaders of consequence. And this has really been influential for me in my career in the cyber discipline, because I walked in with an engineering background, a PhD, but not a lot of security experience. I think that's probably pretty common, that no one really has very much security experience from a formal education standpoint right now. But it may have been the best job I'll ever have. It was time for me to leave, because handing it off to the next person to do the job is just as important as doing it yourself. But I look at those 5 years extremely fondly from a personal standpoint. Second is that I engage a lot with exercises, war games, operational art. I mentioned Squadron Officer School, Air Command and Staff College. All these are opportunities for further education. And I did them in addition to my normal job because I was interested, and you just never know where it'll take you. If you're in a discipline, immerse yourself in that discipline. I have here a legacy of RTSs. I have, of course, all things related to nerd hobbies. In that case, real-time strategy games. I was a StarCraft junkie back in the late 90s and through the early 2000s, and all. Not the level of a pro Korean StarCraft guru, but decent enough. And finally, we do computer game. I do computer games. I sit in front of a computer. I write code. I do red teaming, and that means that I need to get up and move. And so I would encourage you find something active to do. For me, it's running, skiing, and martial arts. But for you, it might be something else, even just getting up and walking around. The best ideas I've ever had, usually they come during a walk somewhere when I'm disconnecting. So a couple pictures at the top here. One is a trip to Hawaii. That's a great chance I had with the Air Force. The second is taken out at Nellis Air Force Base. And that's an old Soviet system there in the middle that they have a place called the petting zoo where you get to just go around and jump on top of old tanks and other infrastructure that they use. And then, of course, the last one is me running as part of the ACE program, high-fiving some patriotic young man who's there as well. So what I really want to focus on, though, is not the who am I side of this, but really what I believe in. What are the things that are important going forward for us, whether it be as a nation or as individuals and as cyber practitioners, in order for us to move from the current state where we're at, which is one where there is enormous threat that grows day by day, to one where maybe defense is possible and we're making good decisions. And when I think about that, I really break it out into two core areas. The first is you're at school right now building fundamental skills. And this is the baseline for what you're doing. This is your time at the range. When I look at what we do in cyber, this is the capture the flags, the network defense competitions, those types of things you might engage in, where you're just building out that fundamental blocking and tackling type aspects of things. This is a precondition for doing training, for doing the next side of it, which is combat capability. This is the composition of those skills is part of a high functioning team. And I think far too often when we look at the fundamental skills, we conflate cyber operations and a true national capability for the ability to complete a capture the flag challenge, to do a reverse engineering challenge, to go to DEF CON and win a medal there. Combat capability from a national sense is all of the elements of that composed. And so an example could use is if you've ever heard of the lumberjack games, it's where literally lumberjacks get together, they try to cut down trees, they walk across logs, etc., as fast as they can. And you can be outstanding at that activity. But if you are great at just knocking a tree down as fast as possible, if I put you in the woods with 20, 30, 40 other people, it's likely you're going to put a tree on someone's head because you just don't quite know how to orchestrate and work as a team. And cyber is a team sport. Success in it is a team sport. This started all the way back really about 10 to 15 years ago when we started seeing collaborative attack platforms and hacking platforms really come into play on that. And it's that ability to amass those individuals towards that common goal that makes the difference. So what do you need to do that? Well, first is obviously leadership. And leadership is that foundation upon which you're able to drive towards some kind of common purpose overall. Overlaying that is you have in cyber warfare. And I'm going to say that all of you should care about leadership, obviously, because you will either be leaders or followers. There are no lone star heroes out there accomplishing things. They're all part of teams. We are standing on the shoulders of giants like Isaac Newton. You are also, if you're in the cybersecurity discipline or the electronic warfare discipline or any of those, you're engaged on a daily basis in warfighting. There's not a significant difference between a operator at a bank making sure that criminals don't hack that bank and someone defending a national asset, other than maybe the consequence of what happens. So obviously it's very bad if an aircraft is hacked. It's also very bad if your bank account is hacked. And the principles apply across this. There is a thinking adversary attempting to apply their malign will to whatever it is you have there. And we need to really look at cyber in this way, is that dynamic interaction between a thinking adversary, two thinking adversaries. In our case, the defensive side of things, and then with whoever the bad guy might be, the criminal, nation state, a terrorist, etc. So the last piece here, when I look at this problem, is your underlying competence. And so competence is the thing that gives the leader credibility. It's also the thing that allows us to operate in our domain. It's that time at the range that you spent. there, making sure that your fundamental skills are sharp. And so I want to use this construct to really frame the discussion that I'm going to have today with all of you. And hopefully I'll try to stay on as time as possible. Competence, warfare, and leadership, because these three ingredients together are what build us out to have the kinds of capabilities and skills that are needed in order to be successful from a cybersecurity standpoint overall. So this is not going to be a completely one-way conversation. And so I'm going to open it up on this one, which is, what is cybersecurity? And what is your definition for cybersecurity? Because I've heard a lot of definitions. During the ACE program, I did approximately 700 interviews over 5 years. I think I heard 700 different definitions for cybersecurity. And I will let you know that if no one answers, I'm just going to call on someone. And so if you think you have a definition, you don't say, you're inflicting that violence on some poor, unsuspecting member of this meeting. And feel free to unmute and throw something out or throw in chat. All right, Brian, John Fredrickson, what does cybersecurity mean? What would you define it as?
So in my opinion, cybersecurity is the defense against networks, any type of online intrusion to protect the integrity and confidentiality of people's data online.
Okay, yeah, I think you hit some key elements there. You talked about
and
data
this can
online.
Include, sorry, I also wanted to say it can include other things like critical infrastructure, not necessarily online systems, but also physical systems.
All right, yeah, great. So there's a couple elements there. You talked about a context of the system. You mentioned physical infrastructure, the idea that it has some kind of other purpose, confidentiality, integrity of the actual data that's there. You mentioned defend networks. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. All right, anyone else have anything to add there? I think you got half the definition. Keaton Persons.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. What other half is missing? We got the defensive side.
Well, I would say that the offensive side would be attempting to gain access to other systems and attempting to see what files they have, and possibly like password cracking and what others?
All right, great. So you mentioned files they have. So that's the information that's there. In this case, you're trying to breach the confidentiality of that information. Maybe you want to change the integrity of the information, or maybe you just want to destroy it completely. You're talking availability. So what I like about both of these is that you're talking in terms of information by and large. And when we talk about cyber systems, we call them information systems for the most part, because they really don't have any intrinsic value outside of what they do for us with information. That's why they exist. This is their purpose. They, in some way, shape, or form, process information. So if we want to define cybersecurity, we really need to have an information-centric definition. So when I think cybersecurity, here's what I guess. It's assuring or degrading the confidentiality, integrity, and or availability of information required for a mission. Mission's my term as an Air Force employee. But what I like about this is it hits both sides that you mentioned. One, assuring, making sure I have that CIA, or degrading, undermining it somehow. So the first piece is there's offense, defense. Second, it's about the properties of the information. Now, I want to know, nowhere here we're talking about defending networks, defending systems. You don't have to do that. What I care about is the information. And finally, required for a mission, it has context. It has meaning. So if I have geolocation data for, let's say, an aircraft that's flying, and it's 3 days old, that may have literally zero value. That changes how I protect it, because I know I only have to keep it safe for 3 days. I might have something like nuclear secrets where I say this has value all the time. And so that dictates how that is protected. right? But in our case for this, it's always about the information, and we protect information intrinsically all the time without protecting systems. And I want to draw a distinction here because sometimes we conflate the idea that we have to defend a system for we need to defend the information. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I go to do my banking, I send my banking information out and it transits the internet, and I have no idea what systems that's touching on the way. It's hitting some set of routers or infrastructure owned by other people, but I'm pretty confident that my information is fine. Why? Well, it's TLS encrypted, and I trust the encryption to be good enough for what I'm doing. So we protect just information all the time. Being on your system does not mean you get access to all the information. If anyone has dropped into a Linux system before and tried to read another user's data or their home folder, they've found that, oh, I can't do it, it's encrypted. So that's protecting information without protecting the system from a user necessarily. And so this is really the context I think we need to have on this when we look at what is cybersecurity. And this is the definition that I'm using going forward when we talk about this in the context of warfighting leadership, and then what is the underlying competence required to execute effectively in cyber. So with that, I'm going to talk about warfare, and I'm going to talk about a part of warfare that is usually not as discussed, and this is doctrine. And what doctrine is the way that the Air Force or the joint community, joint being all the services, say this is what we believe about the world, and this is what we believe is the way to do things. And so there's lots of great things in there, like definitions for terms that really set the context for how we act and interoperate. So first, the joint community, so the entire Department of Defense says cyber is a domain. And being a domain has a really specific meaning. It means it is a place where warfare happens. So that means that if you're in cyberspace, you are right next to the battle, which is why anyone who's going into any kind of role in a cyber job is right next to the battle in both the civilian sector and in the military sector, right? There's not that same distinction between the two. So what does it consist of? Well, you have the internet, of course, that's one we always think of. And then there's all these other things. There's telecommunications networks. So these are the actual hardware moving things around. There's the Internet of Things. I use this in quotes because now it's terms like operational technology now, but all of the things you plugged in. You have embedded processors and controllers. That's the items that were mentioned before that do tasks for machining and that kind of thing. Computer systems, got it, right? We're all on those now. And then I have a dotted line here for an air-gapped system. And that's a dotted line because really when you think of an air-gapped system, it's not actually air-gapped in a way that prevents information from flowing. It's just a either unreliable or low bandwidth transmission medium in most cases. There's every year tons of articles and presentations on covert channels that bypass the air gap. You can go to last year's DEF CON or Black Hat and pull them out of there. So that doesn't provide you with necessarily the safety that you're looking for. It might just prevent an additional barrier. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about cyberspace. It's a place where conflict happens. It happens in it, and you are all right next to it every day because you're only one hop away from the adversary for this. So if it's happening all the time, then probably should think, all right, well, what specifically is defense and offense in cyberspace? We said those are both the sides of it. And these are the definitions that come out of the joint publications for cyberspace defense and cyberspace offense. So this is what's published by the DoD. And now because this is an academic non-attribution environment and I'm working on a holiday, no, I'm not working. I'm presenting on a holiday after hours. We can have a discussion about why I think these definitions are horrible. So once again, please take a moment, read first the definition of a defense. What are some problems that you see with that definition? And same rules apply as before. I'm going to randomly pick names of people unless someone wants to volunteer and save their peers. So I'll give you a 15-second countdown, and then if I see something, I'll pop in from there. Uh-oh, I see there's a shrinking number of people here. I'm driving people out of the meeting as intended. Okay. Zachary, you were brave enough to put something into the chat. I hope you're still here. I haven't checked the logs yet. What are some problems with that defense definition? Oh, and there's some cheat codes in the chat for you as well.
Space may not be protected. He's destroying, but shutting down his process. Yeah, I guess with there's a lot of different components to threats. Because like not all threats would be a breach of your system.
Oh, that's
like
perfect. I love that. Yes. Keep going.
So yeah, not all threats would be a breach of your system. And the end goal at the end of the day is to make sure that you maintain operations so that you can keep the mission going.
Yeah.
So
right,
you want.
Go ahead, Zach.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna say you're spot on. This has nothing to do with the mission. This is totally agnostic of that in the definition. Yeah.
I might have something.
All right, go ahead, Noah.
Defense actions in this particular case exclude other active measures such as counterintelligence to thwart to give the wrong information or specifically pretend to be something you're not. It goes into protecting the system, but it doesn't go into more advanced defense strategies.
Yeah, sure. It's very one note in terms of what it means by cyberspace defense. It's only talking about the things you do want to your system. So that is a great one too. So both you, Noah, and you, Zach, you're hitting on the same idea, which is that this definition is missing some things right off the bat. Number one, it has no context. It's totally unaware of what the actual context of the mission set might be. The second is that, and I see this in the chat, it's talking about defeating specific threats. Well, my favorite part about this is, well, first, I don't know what protected cyberspace is. It's not defined anywhere in this publication. So it's unclear what that might be. It's not really a common term. Then it's saying only threats that are threatening to breach security measures. Well, if I just remove all my security measures, then I never have to do cyberspace defense because that's what it's saying is trying to breach, right? So it does not necessarily encourage great behavior. My favorite one, though, is when I restore something, I put it back the way it was. So I have a system, it's been breached or is threatening to be breached. And now I'm going to restore it to the secure configuration ahead, which is the configuration ahead because I put it back the way it was when it was about to be breached, which sounds kind of insecure to me in the first place. So it's also just internally inconsistent, right? So all of these points you mentioned about what it means for security doesn't talk about information, all missing. But this is the way that right now doctrinally we're looking at cyberspace operations in the defensive operation. I see that there was another one, and you hit mine already in terms of the effect on the offense might not be apparent. So I didn't ask for surveys on the offensive side, but you knew it was coming next. And the build out of this, you see, there we go. One, protected cyberspace. I'm not sure what that is. We'll explore that in a minute. Threatening to breach cyberspace security measures. Why not just bypass them? Any good attacker, and I've worked with red teams before, you don't breach the measure. You go around it. You circumvent it somehow. You're not really breaching it or attacking it in a direct way that we would consider this to be. No one said I breached their trench line by going around it. They would say I went around it. And then finally, we're restoring a system to secure configuration that didn't exist in the first place. The offensive one is a little bit better, but there's two things. One is noticeable denial effects. The thing is that the best cyber effects are not noticeable. So one of the best things I saw done was during an op is they put something in where when you typed, the faster you typed to start introducing typos, man, no one noticed it, and it annoyed the operators to no end. It was horrible. We did have one person who was an advanced hunt and pecker. He didn't even notice that it happened because it was just doing one finger on the keyboard as he went. He was the most efficient guy that day. The second part of this is that it talks about the physical domain. But really, when you think about where wars are won and lost, it's in the moral domain. It's in these effects really, they appear in the mental side of things. When you start screwing someone's head, when you break trust, those are not physical effects. Those are effects that are the best cyber effects, and they strike straight at the ability of the adversary to fight and win. So again, I don't like these definitions, so I want to talk a little bit about more of what maybe we should be have for these definitions overall, and then that brings us to what they view this construct as being. So when you look at defensive cyber operations, the thing that cyberspace defense falls under, really there's that active part of it. These are response actions, and this is not part of the definition you correctly point out, Zach, but it's sitting there. And then you've got these internal defensive measures. So we've got some sense that the DoD defensive cyber construct does say, okay, I've got outside and inside stuff, but cyberspace defense only applies to the inside stuff. And then there's another piece called Donut Ops, which is how do I build things correctly in the first place. We're not going to talk as much about that, but we're talking about that defensive role and where it fits appropriately. And I'm also going to posit that being defensive inside of just your own network is an inadequate view of what happens. And that will come up now to competence. So when we wrote out what these definitions would be and the way we're going to view this, it was done in a way that was agnostic to mission, agnostic to technology, and understanding what was going on. And I want to use an example here of why competence is so important by talking about this idea of what protected cyberspace might be. So if you were to take a guess, and anyone can throw it in the chat or pipe in here, is what is protected cyberspace? Because this is the thing we're defending. And I'll add that nothing's going to be wrong because it's not defined anywhere.
Like protecting a company's network, that could be considered.
Perfect. Yeah, so your network, right? Because you're like, all right, what is protected cyberspace? It's the thing I can protect, right? And if I look at cyberspace as my systems and networks and all, exactly, I'm in charge of my own system. People are piping in now off of your queue, Kathleen, or their advanced hunt and peckers too. It's the things I control, the things that I can actually make a difference with because they're inside of my network. So in this case, cyberspace defense is only referring to protected cyberspace, the stuff I own. So the real question becomes, does my mission depend on only the stuff I own inside of my network, or does it depend on other things outside of protected cyberspace? So we'll start with that as the definition and go forward from there. So thank you for everyone. And also I'll throw it out to Jason Zachary again for hitting the same major points there too. So when I talk about protected cyberspace, I would view each of these are Air Force bases. I have notionally pulled my favorite Air Force bases and put them on here in an image of Conway Castle, which is also my favorite castle. And when you look at the way that these are plumbed together, how do we actually connect? The Department of Defense doesn't own 12 million miles of fiber optic cable. We use internet providers to get our information around. This is unclassified, publicly disclosed information. It just doesn't make sense. It's the same way that the Department of Defense doesn't build its own roads for an interstate. The federal government does that as a whole. And so if I want to get information, say, between them, I have these interconnected web of different providers, and this is all notional. I don't think Comcast and Spectrum are actually connected this way, but it's going to be relevant for the point here. Inside of my mission in the top left, Rome, that's where I work, Rome, New York, Rome Air Force Base. If I want to connect to headquarters, then there's a couple ways I might get there. I could hop through Verizon, AT&T, and HughesNet to get there. Maybe I go Verizon, Comcast to HughesNet. Both these paths from a high level could potentially be interchangeable. And that's how my connection works back and forth, how to get traffic. Now, there are some other paths. And this entire system is built on trust, meaning you trust that people are telling you that I know how to get somewhere. So in this case, you're trusting that Comcast says, hey, I'm only one hop away from HughesNet, and they can get you to Wright Pat, WPAFB, Wright Pat Air Force Base. If Spectrum said, and Spectrum's my internet provider, so please don't interrupt this call. You're wonderful. But if Spectrum were to advertise saying, no, I actually have the fastest path, well, they could divert the traffic and have it route through them for a little bit. And so that means that my mission traffic between Rome Air Force Base and Wright Pat Air Force Base notionally could move through other places in an unintended manner, which is a non-ideal state, right? And the U.S. Department of Defense, we are an expeditionary force, which means that our mission happens outside of the gate. It happens across the globe. So all of our traffic has to leave and go somewhere. And it doesn't just immediately hop onto a milsat and just teleport its way over there. That would be both a waste of satellites and incredibly expensive. So the really question we need to ask is, has this ever happened before? Is this a scenario where the traffic outside of our network, outside of protected cyberspace, has gone unintended places? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. This was a great one from 2018 that came up. It involves a Ukrainian company that was routing packets to the U.S. Air Force. And it wasn't an actual company. This was a bunch of criminals that set up shop using a Ukrainian shell company to do this. And what they really did here was they made $29 million in advertising. So what they would do is they would divert web clicks and then use that to click onto ads and then generate ad revenue for themselves. So it's kind of a really interesting way to abuse the ad system itself to kind of make semi-legitimate profits, other than the fact that you're stealing people's internet traffic along the way. But that was 5 years ago, right? So what we really want to know is, well, could this kind of thing happen now? And could it happen with the types of systems I care about? So what I did was I said, well, I'm going to look for something and I'm going to do a Shodan search. Shodan is a program that lets you look up things on the internet that they're not usually mapped or indexed in a search engine. So in this case, this is an industrial control system. I found a gas station out in Colorado Springs. And the gas station has all sorts of interesting information. It posts, it tells you like whether or not they've got actual fuel in the tanks, what kind of fuel's there, and all. So if I wanted to go get gas, I could just check to make sure that they have some and be like, yep, they do. It looks like they've got, a couple thousand gallons of gasoline in their tanks. So this is an industrial control system. And I chose Colorado Springs because that's an area where there's just lots of interesting things that are happening. So from there, I went and said, well, let's just do a trace route. A trace route tells me from point A to point B where I'm going. And I did a visual trace route to see, and I started in the New York area, and then somehow it ends up mapped to this company out number 5 in Sweden. Now, that seems not ideal. So I was like, well, I should look a little more into this. And I was a little bit surprised that it did this actually, and that the first thing I looked had it mapped over to there. And so this doesn't mean the traffic is literally going there. It just means that it's associated with an IP address owned by a company that maps itself back to Sweden. So when we look at what that trace route came back with, a trace route is every hop that is along the way. There's a couple of things we can immediately see. The first is that this is what we would call protected cyberspace, right? The top pieces here, these are gateway, these are internal networks, these are non-routable IP addresses that are here. The last one is the business that it hops to at the very end overall. So this is what we traditionally call protected cyberspace. So hops 5 through 15 are not a protected cyberspace, which makes us think, uh-oh, we are only worrying about protected cyberspace when we do cyberspace defense. That seems like a pretty significant problem. The hop in question, number 5 here, is some Swedish company, and it is a Polhem Infrastructure is the name of the company. And my question on this was, all right, well, do they take advertisements for routes from anyone else that would be interesting? And I did a quick look, and they have a peering agreement, and this was pulled up just 3 days ago, with Ross Telecom. Anyone want to take a guess where Ross Telecom is from? You can throw it in the chat if you want. Norway. That's a good guess, except it's the wrong R. Yeah. So it is a Russian telecommunications company. Now, this doesn't make it intrinsically bad. It doesn't mean they haven't done their due diligence to say we're vetting the route to making sure everything's fine there. So this is, not making any accusation about feasance, but it's certainly something of concern when we think of cyberspace defense. And really, is there a pattern of doing it in the past? Well, in 2020, Ross Telecom accidentally hijacked 200 content distribution networks and cloud providers and took their traffic. They returned it, but this indicates at least, hey, they have positioning where they have a peering agreement, and they've done this before. And so when I think of what protected cyberspace and whether that's adequate, well, the answer is no, which means that if I'm looking outside of my systems and I'm saying, well, how can I trust what's happening here? The first thing is, what am I putting in place to protect them? Usually we say encryption. So I'm going to encrypt my comms. Encryption is expensive. Encryption is great if I need confidentiality. But what if I only need integrity? What if availability is the most important element? If I'm going to put a weapon on a target, integrity is the most important thing. I must hit the target that I designate. Confidentiality is not as important. I'm going to put a crater in the ground. Everyone's going to know something blew up there. Availability is probably second. And so when we make these decisions, we already do this for outside of our network, outside of protected cyberspace. So when we think of what protected cyberspace should be doing, we need to be making these types of mission-oriented, context-dependent trade-off decisions to say, here's what I care about for that information. And then, of course, the follow-on is that the doctrine we have doesn't say that that's what we should be doing. And that's supposed to be our prescription for how we do things. When I look inside of protected cyberspace, really, you can look at that and date it back to 1986 when we started doing cyber defense, or I'm sorry, 1987, when we started doing cyber defense the way that we do it now. There's a paper by Dorothy Denning. It's called Intrusion Detection Model. And this was based on profiles representing the behavior of subjects. And this probably sounds very familiar because this is the way we do cyber defense now. In 1999, there was a breach of the DoD network. It was publicly disclosed, called Solar Sunrise. And during Solar Sunrise, approximately 30 days to identify the breach and then find. There's a bunch of teenagers in California that were doing it. Fast forward now, 24 years from that date, and the mean time to contain a breach is 73 days, and the mean time to identify a breach is 204. This is a huge problem, and it hasn't really gotten much better since 2017. I guess it peaked technically in 2021, but 277, 287, that's roughly the same thing. It's within the 3 to 4% of one another. It's in the noise. And so when I look at our model for defense, saying it's based on a hypothesis for representing behavior subjects, I'd say that hypothesis is probably not true. We need to do something else because the way that we're doing endpoint defense, monitoring detection does not work. And it doesn't work for a really straightforward reason, is that we are trying to profile something that is constantly changing its behavior every time it thinks it might be caught, and sometimes just because. That's our adaptive adversary. The adversary does not want to be caught. And so they adapt and change. This isn't a science problem in the way that we traditionally view science. That's the way we've been treating it. So in the very beginning, I talked about why do bits take bytes out of your mission? Well, it's because we are not treating it like cyberspace, like a on par with the other domains, warfighting domain, a dynamic interaction between two belligerents who are both changing their modes of operation and seeking to outfox one another. And if we're doing it from the context of we sit and wait for the adversary to adapt, and then we try to figure out what they're doing. Rhetorical question is, if I were to tell you that I have a campaign and my plan is to statically deploy all my forces in known positions and then wait for the adversary to strike, whereupon I would start thinking about what they did and then figure out how to respond and change my deployments, you say, wow, you're going to lose a lot of soldiers that way. We see that to some extent in the way that the Ukrainian conflict has played itself out in terms of very rigid command and control structures. Cyber is the exact same way, but our entire defensive strategy is built around this. More so, when we talk about that important information, most businesses and organizations cannot tell you what the important systems are and why. They might say the domain controller is key terrain. That is the most important thing. Say which of your missions depend on this. And they probably don't know. Also, if I've got a singular box that say does aerial refueling tracks, if there's an exploit there, that has very important repercussions for a certain time span or mission set. If I'm supposed to be having F-16 sip fuel over the ocean, then it's really important that that is right. If I'm not currently planning anything, it's not a 5-alarm fire. You have some time to wait. So we need to be able to make these kinds of prioritizations and have blue force awareness of what we are doing first. And this is actually one of the research projects that we're moving forward with at AFRL is a blue force awareness. How do we actually find blue on the mission sets? Finding red is really hard. We know that generically we're not so great at it. It's taking hundreds of days. How do we find blue as a part of that? Because we should know what it is. And if we can't find blue, there's a good chance we can't find the person who's trying to hide from us. So that I want to hit the last part, which is leadership. And I'm hoping I'm leaving some time open for questions on your side. I've cut this down from a much longer presentation for you. So for me, this is something near and dear to my heart because all of you are going to be either leaders or followers. Being an outstanding follower is just as important as being an outstanding leader. Because you will be augmenting the team and the abilities of that person who is out in front, or you'll be that person out in front, and leaders make the difference. They make people feel safe. They make them more productive. They make them achieve to what their potential could be. So I want to leave you with some of my personal principles when it comes to leadership on this. And I'm going to start the first one, which is when in charge, be in charge. This is H. Norman Schwarzkopf. He was the commander during the first Iraq War. And this simply means that when you are given the mantle of responsibility, when you are entrusted with command or a leadership position, whether you're a team lead, a lead TA, a lead researcher, a captain on a team, take that authority and execute with it. Be in charge, make decisions, and be decisive about what you're doing. Second, maybe seems like it contradicts with this, is give as few orders as possible. The best leaders build consensus, shared understanding amongst their team, and they don't need to give orders. This is a scene from Dune. This is pulled from the movie. Dune is my favorite book. You'll see another quote from here and here as well. And what this really means is once you give orders on something, you always have to give orders on it. The best teams, it's unspoken. You don't see a pro football team that is successful giving orders to break left or right to the wide receiver. They know that they need to either break to the center of the field or break to the sideline based on the coverage there. And because the quarterback is seeing the same things they already know what they're going to be doing together. It is that underlying understanding between that team that allows decisions to just happen without having to have people be ordered to do them. And you'll find this on the best teams you're on. It's like when you say they just knew my mind, they knew my thoughts of what I was doing. Third is tell people what to do, not how to do it. So at the Air Force Research Laboratory, we own the problem space. We are the ones who say, hey, we have an issue with this. I don't know how to solve it because I'm not the specific domain expert in AI or blockchains or cryptography, etc. My goal is to say, hey, I need something that does X. And then you tell me how to make that happen as engineers and experts in your fields. And finally, assume no ill intentions. This has been the hardest one for me. This is, man, I admire Colonel Fred Wieners. And when you are in a situation, it's so easy to look at what's happening and say they're deliberately trying to make life bad for me. They dislike me. A lot of the times, they have no idea. They just are accidentally making your life really tough. And so if you walk in with that attitude, then life's going to be a lot better across the board for you. Last bit as we go through. Sorry, I preempted. I saw 5 minutes though left. I'll go really quickly here. Is we need to change the way we're doing things. And so accelerate, change, or lose is an Air Force moniker now. And there's 3 things to remember. 1, real boats rock, meaning if you see something rocking, it means that someone's being honest with you. And then those last 2 are important to do in order. The The first, it should be break policy, not law. Make that your moniker. Break policy, not law. That's okay. And then proceed until apprehended, because you want to be apprehended breaking policy, not apprehended because you broke law. So with that, if there's any questions I can answer, I would definitely love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for participating with me, all of you in chat and on voice.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Wow. That's a lot of information, a lot of great information, a lot of great examples. Thank you so much. So I will open it up if anybody wants to either put something in the chat and or unmute and ask a question. Raise your hand and ask a question. Oop, I got
So
a
there are
hand up.
lots, and I can ask, there are lots of thank yous and appreciation coming your way, Eric. That's probably the biggest thing that they have as a feedback for you. But I want you to maybe, it was excellent. You had done a great job. Can you, just so we underscore it, circle back to your title and talk the bits and bytes and just make that, circling back,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah, great. And I see Noah has a question too, so I'll hit that in a second. But so why are bits taking bytes out of our mission? It's because we are now viewing the mission, in the security part of the mission, in the context that it's happening. We're not viewing the adversary as being adaptive. We're viewing them as being static. And so what's happening is as we move out, they're just taking little chunks out of it along the way. We're not mature in our models for thinking about this. And so it's, in many ways, it's an organizational problem. It's not a technology problem for that. Noah, you have a quick question before we wrap up here?
Oh, I know some fellow students of mine, Zachary as well, came to the lab a couple of years ago, back in 2021, that summer there. I was going to ask how's it been since since then.
Oh, how's the lab been since then?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, other than the wildfires, it's been great. I mean, the Canadian wildfires were a little bit rough, but yeah, I can't plug the civil service more. I've been told I have to do something 3 total times since I've been at the lab the last 10 years. Otherwise, they've said, go do great things for the nation and let me know how I can support you. And so I've definitely, I think it's the best place to work for me. And it's somewhere you can make a difference. And you get a chance to do things you never could do elsewhere. I was with the aggressors out at Red Flag, which meant that I was working with them to emulate the adversary on keyboard. I've gone to trainings. You can deploy if you want. It is awesome. I was sitting in F-16 at one point, and you don't just get to wander off and do that otherwise.
All right, we have time for maybe one more question. We appreciate Eric being on the East Coast and being up late, working with us. So anybody else have a question?
Right, and I'll stick around afterwards for anyone if the meeting is still going, and if you don't want to ask in front of 33 people, I'm more than happy to do that.
So we got one more from Ben.
Yeah, so you were talking about how it takes a long time, over 200 days, I think it was, to detect intrusion. Would you contribute that? And then we haven't gotten better. Is that because we aren't necessarily focused on that at the minute, or it just comes down to your perspective that adversaries are adaptive and they're just so enough of them that they're crafty enough to avoid detection?
Yeah, great question. So I think the reason that we are not able to identify and detect adversaries is because we're always looking for yesterday's adversary. And they have changed today. We're also very bad at predicting what they'll do. And the reason we're bad at predicting what we'll do is because we're also generically bad fortune tellers. We are not good at predicting the future. If so, we'd all be rich in the stock market. So I think those two things combined with a strategy that is static in cyber, where I can recon a network or a target and it just stays the same for years, it are the major problems to contributing that number. There's another side piece here where what really has happened is over the last 30 years, We have bought software products that are shipped out incomplete. And then the software industry has convinced us that that's okay. I know they're incomplete because when I get them, I download 4 gigabytes of patches for them that were spent that they did because they burned the disk or they released it and they said, we're not actually done building this. I'm going to add more features for you later. And so that in and of itself means that we are not running off of products that are well engineered. It is ridiculous that clicking on a link on a website can hose your computer and then cause the entire network you're connected to be compromised. If that happened in any other industry, we'd say gross negligence, poor engineering and design. We need to hold them responsible, right? Instead, what's happened is we said it's the user's fault. And so we've deferred all the blame onto the user that clicks something that looks just like anything else, rather than saying, hey, we're building bad products. We need to make good products. And the rebuttal to that is, well, it's impossible to make these products good in the first place. And I think to some extent that's defeatist talk. We just cannot continue down the path we have here.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a great one to end on, Eric. Thank you so much, and we appreciate if you will stick around a little bit as your time permits. But we also are really appreciative of your time. For those of you, if you can, the survey for those on our assessment, for the students there, if you can click on that link and provide some feedback. And again, thank you so much, Eric, for a great presentation. A lot of information. I'm glad we have a recording of this so I can go back and kind of capture some of what you said and share it with others, crediting you in the future. But we really appreciate your time. So a lot of thank yous and a lot of great insights. So Asifa, any last comments?
No, thank you very much, Eric. This is much appreciated, and we appreciate that it is done on a holiday and on an evening. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah.